Hey everybody, welcome to the 60th episode of Real Hawk Talk. This is Brian Nemhauser, and I'm coming to you from Philadelphia, of all places. My first trip to the city of brotherly love. We might have a few minutes to talk about experiences here, but we've got a lot to cover on tonight's show. You may or may not have heard that our quarterback signed a new extension. Our best defensive pass rusher was traded. We've got the NFL draft coming up tomorrow. We've got new picks to deal with and to potentially keep or trade. We've got Jaron Reed and Bobby Wagner and other topics to cover. It's going to be an awesome show. I've been looking forward to this really for a week when I knew we were going to do this show, and got even more exciting yesterday when all sorts of fun news broke. So lots to cover today. We are also going to be doing a second show within the same week, Sunday night, post-draft. We will be coming to you at 8 o'clock Pacific time to talk about what happened in the draft. And by then we'll be not only through with the draft, but there will be undrafted free agents and all that stuff will be starting to happen. And Evan's asking me if it was Saturday or Sunday. It is meant to be Sunday, Evan. So if that's a challenge for you, let me know. But that's
it is not. I just have to update my extremely busy calendar. I have millions of people pulling me in different directions, so I will make time for you peasants. I'm just kidding.
Thank you, Evan. Thank you. So yeah, a lot of good stuff. If you haven't already, please take a second, subscribe to the pod on YouTube. Very easy to do. Click the button, takes a second. It's a really simple, quick thing you can do to help the show. Also, if you haven't already, leave a review. It's a really quick, free, painless thing to do that if you leave a review, you can just star the thing, tell us how we're doing, give us feedback. That's super helpful. And it's a way to grow the show as well. So those are two quick and easy things. If you want to do a little bit more, sign up at patreon.com, patreon.com/hawkblogger. We got a private Facebook group. We engage with the folks, and we're actually starting conversations about how we can make it even more, fun to be part of the Hawkblogger community this upcoming season. So now's a great time to get in, and we'll be happy to have you there. So last thing I'm going to say before I introduce the folks is we are a all-volunteer crew, as I think most people know. We donate all the proceeds we get from the show and add even more to that when we donate to charity. And we this year just made our donation. It's $20,000 this year. That brings us to over $120,000 that we've donated to Ben's fund since we started. Really cool, really excited, making a big difference, and you guys helping out connects all that together. We are all super busy as well. And so one of the things, Will Cornell from at Rain City Series has been doing our production. He does all the editing and video work and audio work and posts it on SoundCloud and all that kind of fun stuff. And we want to do more, and Will's got a lot of stuff going on. So we're actually going to hire somebody. I'm looking right now and just started posting on social. But if you've got some interest and talent, it's not particularly complicated, but if you have some interest and talent in that area, let us know. Reach out to us. You can reach out to me at brian@hawkblogger.com, BRIAN @hawkblogger.com. Send me a note, and either Will or I'll get back to you, and we'll see if we can find someone that can help not only get the show posted quicker and but maybe some cut up a little bit, add some clips, help people find it, all that good stuff. So that is all the pre-programming. Let me introduce and bring the guys into the show. Evan, you already had your moment, but at Evan on HB, welcome to the show, Evan.
Thank you. We got tons to talk about. It's going to be fun.
It is. And we've got not one, but two Nathan Ernsts showing up on screen now. He has just rejoined at NathanE11 on Twitter. Nathan, are you there?
I am here. I don't know why there's two of me, but I'm here.
Well, there's never enough Nathan to love, so we were
two Nathans for 2 first-round picks. That's how it works.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd spend a first-round pick on Nathan quite yet. Is that hard?
Maybe if he was a running back.
No, yeah, I think I'm definitely more of a mid-round pick, so I think that's fair.
Okay, all right. Well, I didn't want to offend, but I have to keep it as real as possible on Real Hawk Talk. So, fellas, man, and by the way, Jeff Simmons will be joining us a little bit later. He's got some work stuff. God forbid, anyone has life outside of this podcast. But where should we get started? I think, obviously, if we took it in order chronologically, we talk about the Russell Wilson contract. I kind of feel like that's not where my mind is right now. And if you guys are okay, I'd like to start with the Frank Clark news. I mean, like, I think the typical thing on these shows is keep some of that stuff later so people stick around. Screw that. Like, let's talk about it. Let's start with you, Nathan. What was your reaction immediately after you saw that the news broke? And let me repeat the news for people that somehow might not know. Frank Clark was traded to the Kansas City Chiefs for their first round pick, which was 29, as well as a 2020 second round pick and a swap of their third round pick for the Seahawks third round pick. So the Seahawks actually moved back in the third round. The Chiefs moved up. And they got Frank Clark and signed him to a big deal, larger, I think, than DeMarcus Lawrence deal. Third behind only, I think, Khalil Mack and Aaron Donald, if I'm correct. So when that news all broke, what was your reaction, Nathan?
I mean, immediate reaction was shock. This has been kind of talked about for a while. Seahawks Twitter, of course, has talked about it quite a bit. I didn't actually think it was going to happen, so I was pretty surprised. Although it did seem like the heat was kind of turning up on it. But then after that, I was really happy about it. I was initially against trading Clark. The more I kind of looked into it, in terms of his pressure rates and stuff like that, he wasn't quite as good as I thought he was. It came out today that the Chiefs have him as the second best pass rusher in the league, which I wasn't even quite that high on him. If you look at it in terms of pressure rates, which tend to be more predictive than sacks and stuff like that, he's kind of in a tier or two below, like a second or third tier pass rusher. And so I changed my mind on it, and I was pretty adamant about trading Clark. I would have actually been happy with maybe just a straight up a second rounder. So the terms of the deal were fantastic, I thought. Even if you are a big Clark guy, I think you have to be happy with the first round pick and a second round pick. So yeah, I was really happy about it. I think it's a great job by Schneider. And then when the contract details came down, it just made it all the better.
Yeah, Evan, maybe you can start with your initial reaction and then talk to us a little bit about your reaction to the contract. So first the trade and then the contract.
Well, so no kidding. I was taking a 10, 15-minute nap when the trade occurred on Twitter, and I woke up to my phone buzzing like hell, and people texting me, why did we trade Frank Clark? And then I saw the compensation, and I was flabbergasted. I mean, I don't think there's any other way to put it except John Schneider absolutely finessed the Chiefs. A first and a second round pick, just like Nathan said. So many analysts, so many pundits were talking, would it just a straight second round pick work? Like what would get, him from the Seahawks? And it ended up being a first and a second. So, when you consider the few draft picks we had this year, and whether it be from the Sheldon trade, Jeremy Lane screwing us into the Dwayne Brown trade, like this is a big deal to have this draft ammo, 2 first round picks. This guarantees that I wouldn't be. So what do we have, like 5 or 6 picks right now? I wouldn't be surprised if we end up picking like 11 times. John Schneider's going to have a lot of fun tomorrow night.
And what about the contract that Frank got? What was your interpretation of that?
Yeah, so it was initially reported actually as better than DeMarcus Lawrence, but it's actually not. It's like $500K cheaper per year than DeMarcus Lawrence, with $500K annual bonuses for hitting 11.5 sacks per year. So if he hits 11.5 sacks per year, he'll get that annual $500K bonus, which then if he hit that every single year of the 5-year deal, it would be more than DeMarcus Lawrence over time. However, I mean, it was like $39 million fully guaranteed at signing, $63 million total guaranteed. This is the DeMarcus Lawrence deal, essentially. It's big money, and it's frankly something I don't think the Seahawks ever came close to paying.
Yeah, we talked about this before the trade came down. In fact, I posted a clip today that Will cut up for us that I think was from our last show.
Yeah.
And we've been talking about the potential of trading Clark and honestly also Bobby Wagner. I think we're the only show that's been talking about that with any seriousness, really since the season ended or right around then. And that's been a Nathan and I thing that we've been tossing around. A lot of people hate us for bringing it up. But there was, I don't want to toot our own horn, but I think there was some prescient stuff in that clip. We talked about that. One, Nathan brought up the points around the pressure rate and what was going on there and where Clark really fit. And Nathan had flipped from being against trading Clark to being for, primarily on that point. And I talked about how the right time, the best time to potentially do this trade would be immediately after signing Russell Wilson, when the rest of the league would not be able to assume that, hey, if Russell Wilson had not been signed, the motivation for the league to really pay top dollar, like in top trade value for Frank, would go down, because their assumption would be the Seahawks are going to have to let him go next year because they're going to have to franchise Russell. But because they were able to secure Russell, now all of a sudden there was no guarantee you're going to get Frank next year without making a trade for him. That turned out to be pretty true. I mean, it was like bang, bang, domino falls. And I think Jeff had some really great points about, the team was in a state, I guess, of how did he put it? It was kind of a bit purgatory. It was like his comment was that this is like a 9 or 10 win team that has some mega contracts to hand out for Russell, because we didn't know that at that point what he was going to get. Frank, Bobby, Jaron Reed, which we really haven't spent enough time talking about. I want to spend some time talking about him too. And his point was, they probably have to move somebody in order to get out of this rut, potentially. And rut in this case means that they were kind of within a swim lane, and their chances to really reload with young talent and cheap talent is going to have to come through the draft, and they were going to have to give somebody up to do that. And this is my long way of bringing it back to, and by the way, Evan had a great point in that as well. He was talking about that Frank's kind of a guy that a lot of us, I think, see, and I think the Seahawks potentially see as a good player, $15 million a year player, $16 million a year player that wanted to be paid like a great one at over 20. So I think all good points all around, but bringing it all the way back, the reason that I think, I don't want to speak for Nathan, was fond of a Bobby Wagner trade is because he's at the top of his game. He happens to be a little bit older, and if you could get, meaningful draft capital back of any sort for him, you're probably gonna, want to do that, assuming that you're going to keep a younger player in Frank Clark. What the Seahawks ended up doing, I think they looked at who they had left to sign and make a decision on, and they found a player that there was the most demand for. And I think that there's no doubt that Frank Clark was a guy that had a market. It clearly developed. There's multiple reports are that the Jets were willing to give up the 3rd pick in the draft, swap with the Seahawks at 21 in order to take Frank Clark. I want to throw that back to you guys in a second for, which deal would you have preferred and why. So start thinking about that. But they were able to turn a guy that wanted top dollar into multiple draft picks and clear 20 million plus in cap space for 5 years, right? That's really, really significant for how this roster is going to be built, how this team's going to be built. This is a pretty tectonic shift in how this team is going to be assembled in the years to come. And let's not kid ourselves. Frank Clark's a really good player. He was, if not the best defensive player on this team, he was right up there. There's a massive, massive drop off from him to the next best edge rusher on this roster. So the Seahawks are a much worse team right now than they were the day before they made this trade. That's real, and I think we got to acknowledge that. But I'll tell you my reaction, why I've been bullish on this from the get-go is I think the Seahawks made the courageous, smart move that's going to help them be a much more sustainable contender going forward. They're going to have to make good draft picks, but at least now they have a chance to be more than a 2 or 3 person team. In terms of how their salary cap is going about. So, Nathan, back to you. Knowing what at least has been rumored, that the Jets were willing to give up the 3rd pick in exchange for the 21st pick and Frank Clark. The 3rd pick, I mean, I don't know how people know, but if you look at trade value chart, the 3rd pick is worth a ton. And that could have potentially been turned into a bunch of other picks, or a lot of stuff could have picked an elite player. How do you go about evaluating whether, internally you would have been more excited for the Seahawks to get that trade versus what they ended up taking?
Yeah, I mean, I think, from a trade chart perspective, the number 3 pick is significantly more valuable than what they got, which makes me skeptical that it really was an offer. I mean, in that they would have had to swap up from 3, so they wouldn't have been getting an extra pick. They would have just been moving from 21 up to 3.
Right.
I imagine that there was something else that was a part of that, where Seattle would have had to send a next year's 2nd or something, because that's just it's a lot, and it's really it's just significantly better than what they got from Kansas City. So the possibility of them either sitting at 3 and getting a top tier talent, or more likely engineering a few trades back and recouping some picks that they're missing this year, like, it just would have given them a lot more value. So I think that the deal with the Jets, as it was reported, is better. I'm skeptical that that's real, that was really on the table.
Are you seeing that, like, if you subtract the 3rd pick value for the 21st pick and looking at the trade value points for that, you're looking at that compared to what the Seahawks got in exchange, and there's a significant difference there?
Yeah, so at least by the trade chart I'm using the draft tech one. It would have been a 1,400 point increase. So the pick at 21 is worth 800 points. The pick at 3 is worth 2,200 points. So that's 1,400 points that they would have been on the positive side for. You're basically trading them for 1,400 points of draft trade value. The pick that they got from Kansas City is worth 650 points, and then they got a second round pick next year, which if you do the whole 1 round adjustment for a year out, assuming it's the first overall pick in the 3rd round, that's 260. So that's like what is that, 1,000? So it's a 400 point difference. That's significant. That's basically, if you believe that they turned down that Jets deal as reported, then they basically took they basically lost the 2nd round pick in that. The Jets deal was worth a full 2nd round pick more than the Kansas City deal that they got. So yeah, I'm really skeptical that as reported, that it's just a straight swap of the picks for Clark. That there had to have been more there, because I don't understand why Seattle wouldn't have taken that.
Yeah, I think you'd have to assume there's probably more pieces that Seattle was giving up maybe to make up that difference. But go ahead, Evan.
Did you guys notice anybody else echo that report or confirm that report? I'm not discounting the source because I forget his name, but Mike, I think, has been super reliable in the past. But I just didn't know if you guys had seen anybody who had echoed that report.
I mean, there had been a couple reports that the Jets were talking with the Seahawks and that there was real discussion. And there was a Jets reporter that had come out saying that the Seahawks wanted the 3rd pick and the Jets weren't willing to give it up. So I think that's one thing I saw. But for the sake of discussion and fun, I mean, I think it's worth kind of considering that option. Evan, let's say for a second that it was a real deal, and we don't know what else they would have had to potentially give up to make it real. If they had the 3rd pick in the draft, would you have wanted them to keep that pick and draft like Quinnen Williams, or like one of these potentially game-wrecking blue chip franchise defining kind of players. No guarantee he's going to be that, but that's the kind of player that could be at the top. Or would you have wanted them to turn that pick into, a lower first round pick and maybe a few seconds, or second and few thirds, whatever that would have been worth? Where would your head have been?
You have me really conflicted because that's a really good question. God, considering the lack of draft capital we have this year, I would be tempted to say like slide down a couple spots and pick up like a third if you can, or something in those middle rounds. But if somebody like Bosa is there, or like you said, Williams, or some elite blue chip player, it would be super hard for me to root for this team to trade down. It's just the Seahawks haven't picked that high in a decade, so it would be super tempting for sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure whatever my preference would be, that the Seahawks would trade that pick down and populate their draft board as much as possible. Now, if they hadn't completely blown their draft board through a bunch of bungled moves in the past few years, then I think, man, that would have, I think, staying at 3, there's some amazing things you can do there. And one of the things that's amazing about being up at number 3 is you can trade down to like 8 or 9 and get, an amazing player and populate your draft board. So, I mean, it would have been fun to see to be that high in the draft, but I don't want to come across as not being excited about what they got. I mean, to your point, Evan, I don't know that anyone was really predicting that they were going to get the haul that they got. And typically, I've heard some questions about this. Like, it is not a 2019 second round pick. It is a 2020. It's a next year pick. And typically, the way that's worked is that a future pick is worth about the equivalent of a round later this year. So a 2020 second round pick tends to be worth or valued similarly to a 2019 third round pick in terms of how teams think about it. So you basically go up a round by being willing to wait a year for that compensation. Would either one of you have preferred a 2019 third over a 2020 second? I'm curious about that.
Not Kansas City's 2019 third. I mean, where was that?
That's almost a fourth rounder.
They've got
it's low.
2/3 at the end of the third round.
Yeah. So no, I think going the next year second is the right move. Going back to the whole thing about that Jets thing too, about whether they should have, if they had done that deal, should they have stuck at 3? They absolutely should have traded down, because again, those top picks are valued so highly. They could have traded down to 10 or 11 with Denver or Cincinnati, who both theoretically could want a quarterback, very possibly. And in return, they could have gotten a second, a third, and asked for a next year's second round pick, which they got in the deal with Kansas City. So you'd still be picking at 10. You'd have a second round pick, a third round pick this year, and a second round pick next year. The values, unless Seattle, the trade chart, which has held up pretty well, is significantly changed and teams just aren't valuing picks that way anymore, or unless Seattle was just confident that they couldn't have found a trade partner to move back from 3, to not take that deal and have that kind of flexibility would have been crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're now set with what looks to be, I think, 11 picks for next year. Is that right?
Wasn't it 11 before the trades? I think they're at 12
Is
now.
it 12? Yeah.
John Schneider is dreaming.
And there's 4. That's assuming they get the 4 comp picks that they're projected to get. That kind of leads me down this path of let's talk for a second about what we think could potentially happen to populate this draft board. And before we get into some of the obvious of now that they have 2 first round picks, what they're going to do with those, Do you guys think that they're going to take some of their draft capital from next year and try to use it to create draft capital this year? Package that together to get some picks this year, or potentially. Yeah, I'm curious, Evan. Do you think that that'll happen, or you think John's going to just be?
I don't think so. I think
Yeah.
I think they're going to overcorrect maybe a little bit, and that's fine if they do. But I think they really got screwed by the Sheldon trade. I think they really got screwed by Jeremy Lane, failing his physical, ending up making us lose a third round pick. I think. I don't know if you guys have seen like the press conference interviews with John Schneider over the past couple of weeks. Every time somebody mentions, the 4 or 5 picks that they have, you can see like the visible, distraught nature in John's face. He's visibly hurting about it. So I find it very unlikely, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it would be a terrible idea too. They've done a great job now of setting themselves up with a bunch of picks next year. They've done a good job of setting themselves up with flexibility to create more picks this year without having to reach into next year's. And I mean, I think that I think the justification behind it would be, well, 12 picks is just too many. You're going to just end up cutting a lot of those guys, right? It's just a roster spot thing. But if that's a problem, they can then look to roll it the other way. They can look to trade those picks from 2020 into higher round picks in 2021, right? And this can be the start of what we've been complaining about them not doing for a couple years, right? They didn't do the Sherm thing. They didn't do the Earl thing. They did, the Sheldon trade. And now they've got this bad situation. Well, okay, you paid a price. You traded away Frank Clark, which, as an aside, is good in isolation, regardless of where they are today. It was a very good trade. They should have done it no matter how many picks they had this year. But you pay that price, you get Clark. You've got a couple first round picks that you can trade back and create more capital, which they probably should do. And then you can just, like I said, keep the ball rolling. And next year, if you're like, hey, we just have too many picks, well, see if you can trade a third rounder in 2020 for a second rounder in 2021, or maybe you even get lucky and someone gets desperate and you can do the thing that Ruskell did that allowed him to take Earl Thomas, and you trade a second for a next year's first, right? I mean, this can snowball into a really positive thing that helps them, like you said, be a sustainable contender for several years.
As long as they don't use it to trade for a petulant wide receiver or a wuss tight end, then we should be in great shape. So a couple pieces come to mind here. So I do want to comment for a second about Frank Clark and just my experience with Frank person to person is he's one of the most personable, like gregarious, friendly, earnest, like people I've met on the team. And every time I met him, looks you in the eye, smiles, easy laugh, like just a really good guy to talk with. Very, comes across as a really quality kind of person. And he spent time with, all sorts of people. I won't go into all the details, but generous with his time, generous with his spirit. So I was always impressed with Frank, especially knowing what his reputation was coming out of college. I didn't know quite what to expect, but he didn't come across as a guy that had personality challenges. Doesn't mean that any of that didn't happen, or I'm not attempting to mitigate that, but that was my experience with him personally. Having said that, and as much as I think Frank Clark, like drafting a pass rusher is one of the harder things to do. It's one of the things that the Seahawks have historically almost never done. If you go through their history, Frank Clark, I think when I was reporting out about it, either has the second most sacks or the third. I think it's the second within the first 4 years of his career as a Seahawk. And he started really slow. They all start really slow. I think he had like 3 sacks his first year or something like that. I think that Jeff Bryant is the only guy that had more sacks than like 34 in his first 4 years. So it's really hard to find these guys. And as much as Frank was moving forward there, he always talked, whether it's social media or personally or otherwise, about getting his bag, getting his money. Like that was a big area of motivation for him. And of course it is for everybody. Like we're all trying to earn a living and he should be no different. But I do have some questions about if he was with Seattle. I think he's going to be better off in Kansas City and proving him, having feeling like the need to prove himself a little bit again. But I did have real questions about whether we were going to have the same player after the money that he was before. Nathan, you brought up some legitimate questions about just how good of a pass rusher is he? Like how good of a player overall is he? I think there's some fair questions there. How consistently is he causing those challenges? I have less questions about that, I guess. But he played through injury almost every year. And on one hand, that's really commendable. On the other hand, I don't know that we can be sure that he's going to be as willing and interested in doing that after he's got money in his pocket, like at that rate. So I will say that overall, I feel like the Seahawks risk profile is much less now than it would have been if they had signed him to the deal that he ended up wanting to sign. And I just think from as Nathan said, regardless of how many draft picks they had, regardless of even what other people they needed to sign, to some extent, I think there's some logic to just making this deal as they made it. So before we talk about what they can do with these first round picks, guys, let's talk about what his absence means on the roster and who potentially you're looking at to step forward. Let's start with you, Nathan. I mean, their starting Leo is gone. So where does your mind go in terms of who's first up to potentially take over those snaps?
Well, Jacob Martin is the next guy from a pass rushing perspective in terms of, I think, accomplishment, what he's done so far in just 1 year. And that's more of a sign of what they have on the roster than it is of Jacob Martin, although I'm excited for him. But the guy that you have to really hope steps up and kind of takes that spot is Rasheem Green. He's more similar to Clark. Clark with a bigger body, he's 270, 280 in that range. I don't know what Green was off the top of my head, but he's bigger in that way too. More of a complete end. Martin was real light. I think in the combine he weighed like 230 pounds. So he's definitely beefed up since then, I'm pretty sure. But I would still say that they're going to look for somebody with a different profile for him to kind of take those snaps. You're probably also going to see him do stuff with Nav Jones. You're probably going to see him do stuff with Quentin Jefferson, who I think played some 5-tech last year. So they can do some different stuff like that. But in terms of just, let's say for whatever reason they get through the entire draft, they don't draft a single defensive lineman, which they won't do. But, you're really going to look at Rasheem Green and say that's the guy that needs to step up and take a lot of the responsibility now.
Yeah, Evan, any thoughts there that guys that you have your eye on, with this gap?
Yeah, I think I share similar thoughts to you, Brian, with Jacob Martin. I'm super, super excited about Jacob Martin taking, a big year 2 step. Rasheem Green, we really didn't see anything from him last year. Yeah, he's another player that obviously came into, the Seahawks as a little raw, but I actually do trust this team. I do trust this coaching staff to build up that, talent in that spot. And I think just one thing that I want to close the loop on and mention real quick is the 4 stars we were thinking about paying from a roster construction perspective was Russell, Bobby, Jaron Reed, and Frank Clark. Russell Wilson got paid $35 million a year. Bobby Wagner's probably looking at 17 to 18, so we're talking $53 million right there. You want to add in Frank Clark, that's 53 plus 21, so 74, and then you're looking at Jaron Reed, who's probably going to make like 15, 16 million a year. That's $90 million a year allocated to 4 players. I just think it makes the Frank Clark trade, in hindsight, looking at this compensation, makes so much sense. And the position group gets a lot cheaper and a lot weaker, but I think it was worth it.
Yeah, and welcome to the show, Jeff, at Real Jeff Simmons. How's it going, dude?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm good. I'm on your time zone, man. I'm in Philly, so I feel like I'm finally getting a feel for how in the world you do these late night podcasts.
This must be late for you.
My internet connection is better than yours, though. I think that's. So we're talking about people that are in line to replace Frank and his production on the team, and I'll give my point of view, and I'm going to throw it to you, Jeff. But look, I was just talking with Jacob Martin last week, the week before, and I was like, he's actually left-handed, interestingly enough. I asked him which side he prefers to rush from, and he says either. He's ambidextrous from his, he said he's left-handed, but he considers himself ambidextrous. And he's like, whatever side Frank's not rushing on, I'll take. And when I would talk to him more, I was asking him about, I started saying, I was pretty impressed with the pressure you're able to create and the time you got. And he's like, yeah, he started quoting his pressure rate and where he ranked. And he knew that stuff. A lot of those guys, at least either they say they don't know that stuff or they actually don't give a crap. They just focus.
He actually knew his pressure rate and stuff like that?
He did.
Interesting.
Yeah, he was like, I was 17th in, the NFL, and Frank and I were pretty close. And we talked about it for a little while.
That's really interesting because I think I said it earlier. There was a report out that Kansas City has they consider Clark the second best pass rusher in the league, and like we've been talking, if you look at pressures, that's not really true, not at all. If you look at I think sacks and hits, then he's fourth over the last couple of years, and so you get much closer to that really upper echelon. And so it's interesting to kind of with analytics kind of really getting a foothold and growing in the NFL, you might have different teams looking at different numbers and valuing these things very different, and that may allow for these kind of big trades where both teams feel pretty good with what they came away from, and time will tell.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think Jacob Martin, I've been pretty high on and pumping up. So I don't, as much as I'm pumping him up, I don't think it's realistic for him to step into Frank's shoes, and be that productive. I think that he absolutely is the next guy up in terms of looking at those snaps. I think Rasheem Green is another guy I talked to, and we're hoping to have both these guys come on the show. We'll see if we can work that out. But Rasheem was a little nicked up last year, and I think that was part of it. And he's also pretty young and raw and learning, but he certainly is going to be of all the guys, I think there's going to be the most need for him to step forward. He has, from a athletic profile perspective, his size, his ability to play inside or outside. Interestingly, he is most comfortable rushing from the inside. So, he can do both, but that's where he likes and feels most comfortable in how that plays out. And what that would mean is that, if he is going to make, he's going to be more of a Michael Bennett type and slide inside in pass rush situations more often, then you're looking at two ends that are flipping out. So then you're looking at, Jacob Martin's one, but then you're like, who's the other? And one name, and I don't think this is the one that's going to be third on the list at all, but a name to keep an eye on is Shaquem Griffin. And this is a guy whose, I think, best trait in college was pass rushing. And, I've both heard and talked with some of the coaches a little bit about this. And you've heard Pete say publicly, we want to try to tap into his pass rush a little bit more. We think he's got something there. He's super light for a pass rusher. I think he's 235 or something like that. Maybe he's put on a little weight, and maybe that's part of it. But he's a name that no one's been talking about as an edge or someone who could play there. That's going to be one that could be interesting, especially if it's rotational, coming in a nickel and pure pass rush, and not having to worry about him holding up against the run in any way. So, Jeff, I'm curious, what are your thoughts there in terms of what you're looking to replace Frank?
Well, I think Green is an interesting name. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, I think Green is interesting because we were really excited about him in preseason. And if you remember Frank's first preseason, it was actually very similar to what Green looked like. Frank dominated a bunch of second stringers, and then that production just didn't apply to the season. And everyone was wondering what happened. Green had an injury, and Green just never got any production. But I think you can kind of see a parallel in terms of what their first year was like, the kind of the learning curve they had, and just how good they both looked in the preseason. I remember we were all raving about Green those first couple games. So I think he's the obvious candidate. I think most of the other guys probably aren't on the roster yet. I think this draft, John has mentioned when he was on radio, like how good this draft is on the defensive line. John just mentioned like this draft is loaded with kind of edge rushers, interior rushers, run stuffers, 3 techniques. So when you look at those guys, I think a high pick's going to be edge rusher tomorrow. That's probably the obvious pick. And I think based on the cap room they've cleared, there's going to be a veteran guy brought in. I think that could be Nick Perry. That could be Ansah. So if you look at Green, Martin, a high pick, maybe a second defensive line pick, and an Ansah or a Perry or another guy like that, I think that's how you make it up. Kind of the money ball strategy, replace them with 3 guys in one.
Yeah, we have not talked about that at all. I'm really glad you brought that up. Talk a little bit more about, you mentioned Ziggy Ansah and Nick Perry. There's different implications about which of those guys potentially you go after. Talk a little bit about that, and do you have a preference?
So both of them are different because Ansah would affect the comp formula, and Seattle's very protective of that comp formula right now. John Schneider has admitted as much. But Ansah's in a unique scenario where he was one of the top free agents going in, but he's got a really, really bad shoulder that can't clear a medical exam right now. His agent essentially has taken him off the market. So from the Seahawks perspective, they will not look at him until after May 7th. And Baltimore had him in today. I saw that come out. So they might be competing with them, but Seattle's cap room is pretty good compared to some of these other teams. And Perry was released. They had him in a couple weeks ago. I don't know what he's had a lot of injury history too. So preference of mine is if you can get Ansah, the upside of Ansah is way bigger than Perry's. And if you can hold off until May 7th and his shoulder kind of aligns with that timeline, Ansah was he was a franchise player last year, and his talent level is far superior to Nick Perry. So if you can get him at a decent price and hold off until May 7th, I think that's a huge win for the Seahawks if they can do that too.
So guys, I've got to ask, we've mentioned some of these names before, but it's different now. The Seahawks, as I've mentioned on Twitter, this wasn't just a trade where the Seahawks got the 29th pick in the draft, first-round pick, a 2020 second, and a swap of the thirds. They also got the $20 million in cap space, right? This year, the $17.5 million they essentially freed up, right? So it does bring back into question, like, defensive lineman signings. And for folks that don't know, I think it's May 1st, May 6th, something like that, where May 7th?
Yeah.
Where if you sign someone after that date, it does not count as a conflict formula. So I think we're in this period right now where it's unlikely that a lot of these guys are going to sign with the team because they haven't signed by now. I think people are essentially going to wait it out until after the draft, see what they get, and then look to get guys without hitting their comp picks. Well, is it at all realistic? Forget whether you're interested or not. Do you think that from a cap perspective, it's at all realistic that the team could sign someone like Ansah and someone like Ndamukong Suh? Any feel for what their contract values would be and on a 1-year deal kind of thing?
So trading Clark doesn't actually clear that much cap space, right? Like,
no,
yeah, go ahead.
No,
well,
$17 million.
It does because they had him slotted in for the tag, which is 17.5. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's not a traditional contract trade where you got to eat the dead money and.
Yeah.
Well, and I was just thinking that he was still on his rookie deal, but you're right. I had forgotten that they had tagged him. So yeah, okay, cool. So that seems possible, right? 17 million to get Ansah and Suh. I mean, Suh got 10 last year, right? And Ansah's medicals seem questionable.
I could see Ansah getting it'd be like a 1 year, $10 million deal with literally zero guaranteed and a ton of money, structured into per game roster bonuses, basically, ensuring that he would only get that money if his his shoulder is okay. But I don't know if you guys saw the Sue Instagram post, or it was like in his story or something. Somebody posted on Twitter. He had like 2 jerseys in a picture, and it was like, which one would you pick? And it was the Giants and the Cowboys. Did you guys see that?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, that happened today. So that's relevant.
It is, and I'm not even like, I'm not super high on him. Like I think what it brings up is just this question. I mean, Timmy Jernigan's out there, Corey Legit, Muhammad Wilkerson.
The name I was hearing was Danny Shelton.
Danny Shelton, sure. I mean, he was probably in play either way.
Yeah. Or they're waiting on him till after May 7th.
Only Mo Wilkinson really has a chance here of helping you from a pass rush perspective, though.
Yeah.
I mean, Shelton's not going to give you a lot there.
No. But like that to me, if you're John Schneider and you're looking to hedge your bets, like, we're going to talk about this. I keep teasing it. We are going to talk about what we're going to do with these first round picks. But even if you get Montez Sweat or whoever Brian Burns or whoever you think is like, you hope this pass rusher falls to you. There are not many pass rushers that come in as rookies and dominate, right? Like, it's usually a developmental year, and maybe you're hoping for maybe 5 sacks. If sacks is the stat you look at, you figure out other pressures, but you're going to want to hedge that bet with some veterans. And, you know, we have heard that they were looking at Alan Bailey. Alan Bailey doesn't particularly excite me, but anyway, I think we've been talking about one. I think you could end up looking at multiple in this case. And I think that starts to get interesting. Let's go ahead and go there to talk about these first round picks, because Jeff, both you and Nathan wrote mock draft articles and have some different points of view on what could possibly happen. Jeff, you just published, and I just shared it out, so people should check it out on the timeline. Your mock draft specifically for the first round, now with those 2 first round picks in mind.
Mm-hmm.
What did you figure out, or where did you end up, and how'd you end up there?
So ideally, I don't expect Seattle to use both first-round picks. I'm a big proponent of the trade down. I believe John Schneider is going to want to acquire more picks. I still am struggling to figure out which one it's going to be, and I think that's the biggest puzzle piece going into the draft. But I want to present a scenario where Seattle used both picks, and who are the kind of players they would use those picks on. And so in the 21st range, it seemed like the edge rushers lined up there. I know people have mentioned Brian Burns. I gave them Brian Burns. I think that's kind of a long shot, to be honest. I think he'll probably go in the teens, but I think he's the kind of player. He's an edge rusher, kind of like a Cliff Averill, more of a speed rusher, really athletic guy off the edge. But if he's there at 21, I think he's the kind of guy that John and P would turn the card in right away. I think Sweat is a guy that's a really interesting guy. He lit up the combine. I need a great year in the SEC. I know Josh Norris, RotoWorld, their podcast, gave the Seahawks Montez Sweat in their mock draft. I listened to that this afternoon. I think he's like the Seahawks kind of player. But he's got a big question. Issue.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why he's slipping in the draft. Like, he totally lit up the combine.
And it's a hard issue that's the same that Garrett Scott had, is what I've heard. Is that confirmed?
I don't know. It's a gray area, or if that's the case, that's really scary.
Yeah.
So I think if they're going to stick at 21, I think it's going to be an edge rusher. And so I presented a scenario where Brian Burns from Florida State, I would turn in that card right away. 29, I think they definitely could swap down that pick as well. They could swap down both picks, but if they're going to pick at 29, I think the pick has to be a receiver, because you're in the range there where San Francisco, Arizona, maybe even New England, they're all looking at receivers. So if you want kind of your pick of the litter guy, it could be Akeem Butler. It could be a lot of the names we've mentioned on the show, N'Keal Harry, A.J. Brown. I think if you're going to pick a receiver, 29 is the spot to take a receiver because of those teams mentioned. They're interdivision. So I gave them Harry and Burns. Again, I don't expect this draft to unfold. I think that's way too good. But I think if they're going to use those picks, D-end at 21 and receiver at 29.
Which of those picks were you most excited about if they came true?
Me, I think it's actually Harry there, Arizona receiver, just because we've been talking about receiver, such a big need. I know Evan even tweeted out the idea of like them using both picks on receivers. That would excite me. It's not maybe not the most like I can't see Pete doing it, but it's would be the most fun scenario possible because they might actually build around Russell. But yeah, I'd be really excited by N'Keal Harry. They need a receiver. They need a big guy. He'd be a really fun player that the Seahawks really haven't had at that position, maybe since Sidney Rice.
Yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about Nathan's state version of the draft in a second, which is more about trading down. We'll talk about that, but let's assume for a second they keep those picks. Are there guys that you guys are falling in love with? And Evan, I think you're about to talk. Like, you mentioned two receivers. Could it be a receiver and a tight end like Noah Fant or something like that? As part of that plan.
Yeah, I absolutely got eviscerated on Twitter for that take. 99% of people said absolutely hate it. I'd be extremely pissed off. But then all my fellow Hawk Blogger members were like, no, I'd actually really like that idea. So I would actually be ecstatic with that. I think the wide receiver group is a real problem. I think you have Tyler Lockett and then a bunch of question marks, a bunch of rotational, sometimes suitable type guys, but nobody. Like I was thinking it this way: Russell Wilson just turned 30 years old. You draft a receiver, he's going to be what, 21, 22, 23 years old. That's a straight decade of Russell Wilson in his prime with that receiver to grow with. Doug Baldwin, we don't know if he's coming back next year. He might retire. Injuries are taking a huge toll on him. These are Russell Wilson's money years as a franchise quarterback. We want to make sure we surround him with as much talent at the receiver position as possible. Like I said, Tyler Lockett, bunch of question marks. If it's two receivers, I really don't have a problem with it.
Nathan, anyone that you're kind of have your heart set on and hoping somehow that they get to the Seahawks and you'd be really excited to hear their name called?
There's been talk about Clellan Ferrell, and I have no idea if I'm saying his name right. Ferrell. I don't know. I've heard weird pronunciations. I don't know why he would get to Seattle. That seems like a pipe dream, but he's a guy that's a lot of fun. And then I do like Sweat quite a bit, but the heart issue is a big question mark there. So if he does get to Seattle, I'm going to be pretty concerned about why he's available at that point. In terms of receiver, though, I don't have a guy I love. There's a lot of guys to me. This is a deep class, but not a top-heavy class at all. I don't think that there's one guy that's just so much better than everybody else. People love Metcalf, and he's like super rocked up. But he also, only caught for like 550 yards. He has drops. I'm not like big into him. Harry is a lot of fun. I think he'd be a good pick for them. He's maybe the receiver that I like the best of the bunch. But yeah, I mean, getting back to the two wide receiver thing, I wouldn't advocate for it necessarily. I don't think it's something that they like should do. But if the board breaks, like, it's very possible that there's no edge on the board for them when they're at 21 and 29, right? Burns and Farrell could be gone. Sweat could be off their board. Gary could be off their board. Simmons, an interior rusher, could be off their board. Jerry Tillery could be off their board. All those guys have injury concerns. And so, if they end up, trading back a little bit, and then, just the two best players that come up are receivers, it makes a lot of sense. It's a need for them, and I think it'd be perfectly defensible.
Yeah, the Seahawks draft tendencies used to be where they would take more of a risk on injury flagged players, and that was part of their strategy. They actually believed in their strength and conditioning approach and their nutrition and the ability to coach these guys up and get them in the program, so to speak. And I think the Malik McDowell thing, among others, they had a couple things that didn't really go their way. And they've come out publicly and talked about how they've changed their approach. They're being a little bit more cautious. You remember for all the the back and forth about the first round pick last year on a running back, they talked a lot about how he had never been injured and that he came across as a really durable selection, and that was a big part of, you could hear in the way they talked about it that was a big part of their evaluation. So I do wonder about whether a guy like Jerry Tillery, for example, who some scouts are talking about as, if he didn't have this ACL injury, and even with it, they believe that there's a chance he could come out as one of maybe the best player in the draft from an overall talent perspective.
Do you mean Tillery or do you mean Simmons? Simmons had the ACL. Tillery had the shoulder, I think.
Yeah, so is Simmons. Sorry, excuse me. It was Simmons. So I'm curious, like, do either of you guys, or do any of you guys, specifically, I guess I'm targeting Jeff and Nathan, who spent a little bit more time evaluating prospects. Do you think a guy like Simmons is worth taking that kind of gamble on? Is the upside there?
I haven't watched much of Simmons, so just from a prospect perspective, I can't speak about it. But I agree with Ben on this one, and I think this is probably just common knowledge, or it's common sense too. A big part of the benefit of rookies is that they're cheap and that you have them under, team control, so to say, for 4 or 5 years, right? Potentially. And with Simmons, you're looking at punting one of those years, and so the value there, if he doesn't play for a year, if you have to redshirt him, is significantly lower. So even if he is a very good prospect, it comes at a trade-off, and so I don't think it's worth it. Jeff,
you concur? You have a different point of view?
Yeah, that's a tough one for me, considering the prospect has the exact same name as me. Jeffrey Simmons is my name. He spells it differently though. But I agree with Nathan, and I think the Frank thing adds to that for sure. The fact that they don't have Frank right now to use a pick on that position, and they're just redshirting a big year of his rookie contract, and Seattle doesn't use the 5th-year option as much as other teams. And really, they just aren't. They need immediate contributors. They're just not in a position where they can redshirt a guy, like a team like the Colts or the Eagles, where they have a lot more depth and they're kind of further along in their development. They could afford that team, but I don't think Seattle's in that position right now, where he's probably not going to play this year. And if he does, it's not till December, January. I think that would be a mistake, and I think that would be them getting a little too cute.
So forget players for a second. Last question before we go into talking about trade downs and some of those scenarios. Again, assume they're going to keep those 2 picks, which I don't think any of us believe that that's going to happen. They're going to keep those 2 first. Which positions, you can only pick 2, which 2 positions would you be most excited about the team addressing with 2 first-round picks? And I'll go first. I mean, for me, safety, and I actually would kind of go receiver. It's hard for me. I generally go to edge. Like I think that first round picks, I'm always around offensive line, defensive line, and so that's my tendency. But I think there's some really high quality on the receiver side this time, and I'd be interested there. So I think I'd probably be most excited if it was receiver and safety. How about you, Evan? You have a point of view on this one?
Yeah, I think receiver is a huge need, and I'd also probably go edge over safety, honestly. I don't think Tedrick, like Bradley McDougald is a stud, but, Tedrick is up and coming, if I want to be generous. I think the safety position is doing okay. I think the edge position is a real issue without Frank.
For me, I'm with you, Brian. Oh, sorry. I'm going to jump in line. Wide receiver and safety. I think, N'Keal Harry and Juan Thornhill are 2 guys that are very realistic, good players. Thornhill is just, much more dynamic than Tedrick. So I think with edge, a lot of people are talking, like we talked about earlier, like trading next year's picks to move up and make sure you get a Brian Burns or something like that. It's a pretty deep edge class. I don't, when I go through the mock draft stuff, I don't really feel the pressure to take an edge super early. There are guys later on that are good players that you can still grab. So especially if they trade down a little bit and they get a late second or an early third round pick, I don't think edge is really pressing for them.
Jeff?
Yeah, I agree with all you guys. I think it has to be some combination of receiver, safety, edge. And I think receivers one I would like to see them address early because of all the reasons we mentioned. But I think Nathan brings up a good point. John has mentioned this before, that the defensive end class runs from round 1 to 3, essentially. That's where it starts to drop off. And there are some names like Chase Winovich of Michigan as a guy who's plays with his hair on fire, really good player off the edge. I like him as a prospect better than Gary from Michigan. They were teammates there. I think you can still get. There's a guy Collier from TCU. Maybe you can get the end of the first or late in the second. There's guys that you can get down. I think safety and receiver, just because of how scary those positions are right now in terms of how weak we were at free safety last year. Sorry, Tedrick. And just receiver, the issues that Evan brought up earlier, and just the fun aspect of those two positions and how flashy those guys are. I like to see safety and receiver.
Yeah, and I think if anyone's been paying attention to Schneider's draft tendencies and the way the Seahawks think about this, there's one that's really, really consistent, which is the way they look at this is they not only have everyone stacked on a board 1 to N about who's most valuable and where they have them slotted, but they have where they have gaps, like where they're maybe they have 2 guys slotted as first round safeties, and then they have nobody until 4th round as a safety. And there's a big gap there that they see. In those situations, when there's a position of great depth and a position where there's a big chasm, especially if they have a need in that position, they will draft that position early. They will artificially push that position up on their draft board, take that early, and bet on the fact that they're going to be able to draft due to the depth in those other positions later. So I think the tendency, generally for fans, is, oh man, I'm hearing it's a super deep cornerback class, or I'm hearing it's a super deep edge class, or whatever it may be, and we're hearing that absolutely about the defensive line this draft. Is, so the Seahawks are going to grab one of those guys early, and one of these names that we keep hearing. I think the likelihood is that the Seahawks don't go edge early unless the guy that they really want, that they have super high on the board, falls to them, and that they draft that later, and that they potentially use some of their earlier picks on some of the positions that they know they need to address. Wide receiver and safety are 2 glaring needs. And bet on the depth for the edge later on in the draft. So that's kind of my expectation going in, even though I would not be sad to see them call out the name of a promising edge player early. So let's talk about the more likely scenario here, guys, by far. I think everybody expects this. The Seahawks still have, 5 picks this year? Mm-hmm. They have 5? They're up to 5. Woohoo! They had 4, they now have 5. Nathan, take us through your, I know you did your mock draft, and I know there's probably some changes since, but what's your expectation about which of the picks that they move, and what are some scenarios you have in mind of what they could potentially do in terms of turning those picks into more picks?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of scenarios, right? I mean, you can sit there with the draft trade chart and kind of, pick any team and just kind of figure out, okay, what would it take to add up to 800 points or 640 points? I think it's what 29 is. And a lot of that is going to depend on how the draft shakes out and who's available and team needs. So it's hard to kind of say, it's going to be Indianapolis. Maybe they certainly have the capital and the flexibility to make that kind of a move. But if 21 rolls around and no one that Indianapolis is in love with is on the board, or Indianapolis does love somebody, but they don't see any of the teams in front of them taking them, they're not going to move up. So it's a really tricky thing to predict. And I think John's talked about this quite a bit, and, that it takes 2. And so I think that they really have to work at this. it's not easy to really know exactly what. The one that I do kind of have a favorite one that I like, just based on kind of tendencies. I think San Francisco has been a pretty aggressive team, kind of a splashy team so far. And so if you take their second and third, which is the fourth pick in the second round and the third pick in the third round, that works out to just about 800 points. So, they're a team that might kind of look to make a move. It's a trade that, in terms of draft points, is very slightly in their favor. And I think that's one that could potentially happen. And then trading down from 29, you could look at Arizona with the first pick in the second round, and then the first pick in the fifth and sixth round. If there's somebody that they like, if they take Kyler Murray, and then you got an offensive lineman that drops down to 29 or something like that maybe they want to kind of jump up and make sure that they grab, that's one that they could do for pretty low cost, really, if you're Arizona, right? Just a fifth and a sixth round pick to move up a few points, a few picks up into the first round. So those two seem pretty realistic to me, but there's a ton of permutations that could happen.
Do you feel like it's more likely that they will move 21 or more likely that they will move 29?
I think that they will try. I think that they try to move every pick. I imagine. I mean, I think that they're probably pretty open about this. I think that they're going to have trade discussions on every pick throughout pretty much the entire draft. I think that they should, if it's like an either or, I think they should try to move 21 because it's the one with the most points. So it's the one that you can get the most back in return. But again, it just depends on who's on the board and who is interested in who's on the board, right? It's not a it's a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah. So Jeff, I'm curious. One team that we've heard there's been rumors about that wants to move into the first round is the Browns, and they currently do not have a first round pick. Their first pick is in the second round. It's number 49. I was going through and trying to figure out what might work there. If they wanted the 29th pick for the Seahawks, if they wanted to come up with something close, they'd be looking at giving up their second round pick, number 49. So you drop from 29 to 49, so it's 20 spots. But you'd also get the third round pick, number 80, and probably the fifth round pick, number 144. So you go for the Seahawks from having the 21st and the 29th pick to having the 21st and then having a second round pick, the 49th, which they don't currently have, and then 2 third round picks, a fourth round pick, and 2 fifth round picks. And that would end up with 4 picks in the top 100 if they were doing that. Now, that's a lot of consolidation for a Browns team that already doesn't have a lot of picks, but otherwise they're going to have to be looking at 2020 draft picks to sweeten the deal. So talk about that potential for a second. Is that an interesting move to you? And if not that, what are some other scenarios that you have in mind?
I think John Schneider, that's the kind of move I can definitely see him liking. I think that would open up their draft in a lot of ways. They wouldn't have to force positions. They'd be able to address. You can even take 2 receivers with the extra third. You can really round out your roster. I think he would be happy with that. I don't know if I can see the Browns doing that. They've gone pretty heavy all in this year, and they've run a lot of big money players and adding another first year contract and giving up a lot of their draft capital might not be the most logical scenario for them. I think they're probably just going to stick in round 2. But the thing with the Seahawks that's interesting now, there's just so many. It's like a moving puzzle piece, like Nathan explained. There's so many ways they can go with this. They can move down both picks. They can move down 1. My initial thought was keep 21, get the best player, then move down 29 and add another day 2 pick. But once you guys start presenting scenarios to me, I think it's best maybe they stick at 29 and move down 21 to get the most in return. So really, I've gone through a roller coaster of emotions. My first thought after they trade Frank was do not trade any of these picks. Let's get some blue chippers in here. We've talked about how much more valuable those first round talents are. This team needs them. I even wrote that in that article we did a couple of months ago about things the Seahawks need to fix. So they need first round value out of these players. So that was my first thought. The more I've thought about it, I want to kind of get more day 2 picks. I think that's the strength of the draft. So that's probably moving back from 21, hopefully maybe sticking in the first round or early 2, then maybe selling 29 too, getting those another high second and a late 3 maybe. So it's just, I've gone through a roller coaster. Now I'm nervous that John Schneider's going to screw this up and get too cute. That's where I'm at now. I'm worried that they're going to like try to do too much and kind of blow this thing. Where I was pretty discouraged about this whole draft. The Russell Wilson thing before they signed him brought me down. I was worried they only had 4 picks and they were going to have to trade down and take a lesser deal. And now the Frank thing really brings urgency to this draft. And now I'm really, really excited about it and really, really like anxious about it at this point. This is probably the biggest draft Schneider's had since like 2012. Like, yeah, after trading Frank and all their roster holes, they really need to hit on these picks. So I'm really eager to see what they do and how they move down the board because, like Nathan said, you can't really predict. There's so many ways they can go at this. There's this whole draft has just been completely reinvigorated by this Frank trade. Now I'm pretty pumped to see how they do it and where they end up going.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time they've had 2 first-round picks since 2010. Their first draft, right?
Correct. They don't use first-round picks in most years. Now they got 2.
Right. It's a very different draft profile from what they've had before. Now, there's only 5 picks total. They're all in the earlier rounds for the most part, the 5 and earlier. But it does feel, and these picks are much lower in the first round than the picks they had. You know, they were top 10 picks back then in 2010. But in any event, it is going to be interesting, and this is a different situation than they've been in for a little while. I do have some concern that John Schneider is going to look at the Bengals and their 5 7th-round picks and decide he's going to trade one of the firsts for 5 7ths. I hope that doesn't happen. But seriously, I think the Colts are a really interesting potential trade partner. I think they've got a lot of ammunition, and there was one potential deal I was looking at where, for the Seahawks 21st pick. So this is different than the 29 one we were talking about before, where you go with the Browns and you turn that into kind of multiple, second, third, and maybe a 5th, something like that. If you took the 21st with the Colts, you could potentially get a second, number 34, which is not a huge drop, 13 picks back, but a 2nd-round pick, a 3rd-round pick, number 89, a 5th-round pick, and a 6th-round pick. So now you'd be talking about going from the Seahawks having 5 picks in this draft to 9 picks in this draft with 1 move. And again, whether the Colts would do that, we can debate whether that is the case. But I'm just using that to illustrate, Nathan's point earlier where, and to your point as well, Jeff, that the benefit of moving the 21st pick, there's a significant difference between 21 and 29 in terms of trade value. I think it goes from $640 for 29 to like $800 for 21. And so you could really, if you get the right trade partner on 21, that could be your one move that populates your whole draft board. Now you're up to 9 picks, which is generally what Schneider prefers to be at in any draft. And now you can kind of do what you need to do. You have the flexibility. If you want to stay at 29 and pick someone there, great. If you want to move back and add even more picks, you could do that. I would say if they made a trade like that, traded from 21 out of the first round to something like 34 and all these others, I would hope that they wouldn't trade out of the 29th pick. Like I do feel like, and this is where Nathan and I are slightly different, maybe significantly depending on your perspective. I do think that they can get too cute and just trading back and trying to accumulate every possible pick and then not keep a lot of those guys anyway. I think that there's first round talent to be had, and I think that I'd like them to try to stick with at least one of these picks, to stick in the first round and get one of them. So that's my preference. Evan, we were just kind of talking about Evan's stuff in his face, so I'm going to immediately throw to him. Evan, what do you think about trading back in the draft?
God, I agree with Nathan that 21 is definitely the most valuable, and if we can recoup, I don't know if you have the trade chart in front of you, Nathan, but if we could drop from Actually, let's play a scenario. What does dropping from 21 back to 30 look like, Nathan? Is that a third round pick? Is that a late second?
It's a mid third round pick. It's actually almost perfect. It's the equivalent of the 18th pick of the third round.
Wow. See, that's something I would do, where if you could pick up a receiver at the tail end of the first round and pick up a mid third, I think that's a no brainer.
You have to do business with Green Bay though if you're going to do that.
Fuck that team. I hate them so much.
I would say that, one thing to keep in mind here is that it's fun to look at it. Like the one I threw out there was San Francisco, right? So that's dropping from 21 to 36. So that's 15 picks or whatever. And it's fun to consider those because those are the ones where you can get the big values, right? But I think it's more common for them to move back like 5 or 6, right? So like if you're talking about Indianapolis, you're probably more likely to trade from 21 to 26, which is 100 points, which is still a third round pick. That's nice. But, these big drops where you're going to go down 10, 15 picks, probably less likely.
What makes you say that they're less? Go ahead, Jeff.
I think John really hated last year going through that full second round and not having anything. I don't think that he's going to want to do that again. So I think he's going to want to have something in that second round just to balance their draft a little more. And so they aren't forced to kind of do things and reach and watch like 80% of the guys they want just fly off the board. I think that really hurt him last year.
Well, that's the part that I am, concerned about a little bit. I think that it is going to be hard for, like, the way this typically works is you're going to get your best offer once you get closer to your pick and people know what they can potentially get for that pick, like who they're going to be able to draft. And I'm a little concerned that Schneider will get to 21 and take the best deal offered as opposed to a good deal. And I think he should be aware that he's got 29. And if he's not getting adequate compensation for the 21st pick, then take a player at 21 and then, bide your time and make a deal at 29 and use that as the place you take the best deal available. But I don't want to see them give away the 21st pick for less value than it's worth just so that they can populate their draft board. Like, I think they need to get a good deal and they need to maximize their value. And they need to hold their water, like not panic and not just assume that if they don't do this at 21, then they're going to be really screwed and they're not going to be able to pick in the second round with 29. Like, that's the part that I'm a little worried that they'll panic a little bit. I hope that's not the case, but I find it really hard to imagine a scenario where the Seahawks pick at 21. As much as I like the idea of sticking at 21 and figuring out a way to turn 29 into more picks. One, I think there's a lot more value that they can get for it, which you already talked about. Two, I think the Seahawks are going to want to know and feel assured, that they've got their draft more populated, and so I think they're going to want to make a move there. So highly unlikely to pick at 21 as far as I'm concerned. So we could talk a little bit more about the draft, but I do want to, and if you guys have things, feel free to steer us back there. But I do want to talk about some of the other ripple effects from a roster. Again, this involves the draft as well, of what's happened. So I'm going to cover the Russell Wilson thing last. We'll see if we ever cover that here. We haven't even talked about the contract. That was a pretty big deal that happened. But what's next? What's your next priority? Like, we've talked here about Bobby, and we have not talked almost at all about Jarran Reed, which I'm disappointed in all of us that we have not had that conversation on this show more often. I finished our last show, and I was like, what in the world? I actually think he was a higher priority to sign than Frank.
Is he the most underrated player on the Seahawks?
Dwayne Brown is a second-team All-Pro, and we never talk about him. So I think it's Dwayne Brown.
Yeah, but Jarran Reed had 10.5 sacks as a DT.
No, he's good, and yeah, for sure. But
yeah, no, I hear you. Left tackle's important.
Ben Baldwin would say Jermaine Ifedi, just for you.
If we pick up his 5th-year option, you know that clench fist meme, like that. I don't even know what show that's from. That would be
Arthur.
me all day for the rest of my life.
What is the number on the 5th year? Do we know what that number would be for him?
It's more than he's worth. Whatever.
I don't think that's true. I actually think they should. I think he'll be a value on it because it's probably 7, 8, 9 million.
I'm pretty sure it's actually 9 million, but let me check. Will the Seahawks?
If it's 9 million, which I think it sounds right, that's probably, in terms of market rate, you're maybe getting a little surplus value out of Fetty there.
I was right, 9.6 million.
Yeah, I think that's a fair deal for him.
Disagree. I want them to move on from him.
Like, do you really think like the step down from Ifedi to Fant, is that worth $9.6 million? Or I guess because your Fant's salary, is it worth like is it worth $9 million? Like, are we sure?
Why? I don't know. We've hardly seen Fant play, and when the last time we did see him play, he was bad. And then the time before that, when he started for a while left tackle, he was bad. Like, I don't know why. Like, obviously, a lot can change over the years, but like, and I'm optimistic about Fant, but like the idea that he's some hidden gem on the team, I think there's a lot.
Well, let me be clear. I'm not saying Fant is a hidden gem. I'm just saying I don't think there's that much of a gap between. I don't think the gap is worth $9 million to allocate.
Okay, $9 million actually is more than I thought. I didn't. So the top paid right tackle right now is at 12.5 or 12.75 million. Lane Johnson's out. Juwan James. He just signed this year. So, and then you got Lane Johnson, who I think signed a year or two ago at 11.25. Ricky Wagner at 9.5. So 9.6 for Ifedi is actually quite a bit. It would put him top 5. So maybe I'll retract that.
Won't do that. And Fant, I think, played right tackle a lot of last year. I mean, he was tight end over Ifedi, and so he was on the edge, not Ifedi in some of those cases. And take it for what it's worth. But he graded out significantly higher than Jermaine in Pro Football Focus on both pass blocking, and run blocking.
Think about this. If you're going to apply the 5th-year option to Jermaine, then obviously you're thinking about extending him, and then that 5th-year option becomes, like, from a player-agent negotiation standpoint, that option absolutely becomes the baseline APY number for a new deal for Ifedi. So are you looking at spending 3 years, $30 million on Ifedi, making him a top 3 paid right tackle? Like,
I wouldn't think that because you pick up a 5th-year option, you're likely to extend him. I think that if I thought $9.5 million would have been more midline for right tackle. So I was wrong there. So, but I think that if you pick that up, you could just think it's. I mean, you're obviously not obligated for anything beyond that. So I don't know that you necessarily would extend him. Interesting though, George Fant, $3 million this year, not $500,000 or.
Oh, yeah, good call.
And free agent next year.
Yeah, it's his tender. You're right.
So what is Fant going to get paid next year? Right. So you're talking. No, probably no. He won't get 9.5 or whatever. So you're still probably talking $5 million difference. But
yeah. I
have a question about Jaron Reed. How did we get here?
Well,
no. What about Jamarco Jones? Isn't he the guy we should be excited about?
I'm telling you.
Thank you.
There's plenty of other options.
Fant is a tight end.
Well, I talked to Elijah Nkansa, who most people probably don't know the name yet.
He was in that Chiefs game.
Mm-hmm. And
name right. Wow.
The Seahawks are I think are pretty high on him. He's 24 and a good looking athlete. Like he does not look 315. He looks pretty agile. I was joking with him if he plays any tight end, how good of a receiver he is. He's like, well, George Fant's got that position on lock. He's not giving that to anybody. Which is interesting that it sounds like maybe George is still planned to be used there, but he plays both guard and tackle. And he's another name that I think is gonna be worth watching there, as camp kind of breaks in. But you are right, Jeff. We were talking about Jaron Reed, and I honestly don't remember. Oh, most underrated player. That's how we got.
I lost track for a second.
Yeah. I would say Tyler Lockett is still pretty underrated, and given how good he is. But I hear you, and I think Will Dissly is probably underrated. I could keep going, but so Jaron Reed. I wrote after the Russell signing that for me, this is before the Frank deal. Jaron Reed was my preferred priority from a signing perspective. I think finding a young interior defensive lineman that can create double-digit sacks and is durable, has played and had very little injury issues, not even like played through injury. He's just been healthy for the most part. Can play the run and be a pass rusher, and is already establishing himself as a team leader. From the get-go. Like, sign me up. Like, that's a foundational player that there's not a lot of question marks about, other than the fact that, I don't think you can expect double-digit sacks from Jaron Reed every year. I don't think that it's just gonna like be some linear thing where he's just gonna keep going up. But he's shown enough to me where, to me, he's a higher priority to sign than Bobby.
I mean, I still think they should trade Bobby. Right.
All right, tell me why.
Because all of the reasons to trade him are still true. He's going to be old. I was looking at kind of linebacker career trajectory, and most linebackers don't make it past 30 at a high level. Those guys are pretty few and far between. It's like Ray Lewis and Zach Thomas and maybe one or two other guys, but it's just not common for middle linebackers to maintain a high level of play past the age of 30. In fact, there's a pretty steep cliff at 30. So I think you still have the question is still, what do you actually get for Bobby, right? If it really just a 4th round pick, then maybe it doesn't make sense. But if it's a 3rd round pick, if it's a 2nd round pick, Clark just exceeded our expectations by quite a bit. He's not going to approach that kind of a deal, but maybe you can get more than you think. I think you do it while the getting's good.
How dare you?
I'm sorry, these guys.
Dare you?
Football careers are short.
You? Bobby Wagner is a franchise, roster, player, team, executive, employee, leader. We're not trading Bobby Wagner.
He was that. And he probably will be that. He probably will be that this year. But will he be that the year after? Will he be that the year after? Are you going to give him
likely.
You have to give him like the CJ Mosley contract next year.
Done. So I'd offer it to him right now. Are you seriously thinking about trading Bobby Wagner?
Absolutely. They should do that. And they should have traded Clark, not because of the Russell contract and not because of the upcoming potential Reed and Wagner contracts. They should have done it because it was the right thing to do, right? Now, maybe Bobby doesn't want the Mosley contract, or maybe, there's possibilities here. But like, if Bobby Wagner wants to be paid $17, $18, $19 million a year for his age 31, 32, 33 seasons, that's going to be a bad contract, almost certainly. Not certainly, but almost certainly. So they should probably try to get while the getting's good.
That front 7 without Bobby Wagner is the worst in the NFL.
Probably.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that's fair. I've been right next to you on this, Nathan, from the get, and I've been pretty unflinching on staying with it. Part of me thinks, like you said, get while the getting's good. I think the good's already gone. I don't know that. I don't know, like, if the choice is signing Bobby to a couple years, 2 to 3 year extension for a lot of money, or getting like a 6th round pick for him, or some kind of like super low pick, I'm not convinced that kind of deal is good. Like, and I'm not sure. I'm also not certain. People are like, oh my God, you get more than a 6th. I'm not sure you would. Like, so I don't know what his compensation would be. If you could tell me that you could get like a 3rd for Bobby, then maybe it starts to be interesting. But even then, I'm kind of, I'm wavering on this one for the first time, and I think if I'm reading the tea leaves, regardless of what I think or prefer, I think they're going to sign Bobby. I think he's sticking around, and I think he wants to be here. And I think Bobby would tell you that he believes middle linebackers play a long time and that they sustain their level of play. We'll see, but I expect Bobby to be right.
This is the worst take in the history of this podcast.
Oh my god!
I don't know.
And that includes my food takes. That includes my opinions on food.
Evan, have you burned anything or tattooed anything yet? Because there's a lot
I
of
have no
questions.
idea what you're talking about.
I know.
Wait, could you pull up the tweet on my tweet history?
I'm sure somebody's got a screenshot of it.
Oh my god!
We talk about
Dear
Evan's
Twitter,
Anybody-
please help us out on this one.
Anybody could Photoshop a screenshot. Pull up the tweet, Brian.
Are you tweetscaping, like manscaping? Like you're now like
You went
shaping
nuclear.
your untoward zones in Twitter?
You know, I literally had to pay actual money to delete my entire Twitter history. I'm not kidding. I am not kidding. Because you can only delete 3,200 tweets at a time. There was some like database issue, so it was like $4 to delete everything.
Why did you delete all your tweets?
Have you seen his tweets?
They're valuable. They're part of our history.
There's an archive. I stored them safely in precious, precious safe places.
That's so selfish. What about the rest of us?
I mean, we can pay $4 for that archive.
Pay to play, baby.
Yeah, can patrons get access to your tweet archive?
You know, I'll send them a zip file.
Okay. All right. That might be value for Ben's fund might be getting more money next year. Yeah. So I mean, my point here is, I think that they will go to sign Bobby next because that's the respectful thing to do. But if I'm looking at what the priority is for this front office, I think they should be figuring out what the Jaron Reed deal is first. And if then after they do that, they realize, I don't know that we have the money to sign Bobby, then I would be more motivated to potentially take less than I would have before. If you sign Bobby and by doing so, you can't actually secure Jaron Reed, like you don't find a deal that you're comfortable with, I think you've really bungled things. Like, I don't think this team with Bobby for the next 3 or 4 years without Jaron Reed is at all on the right trajectory. They need someone in the middle of that line.
So just to interject real quick, after the Russell Wilson extension, we're looking at $65 million in cap space for 2020, just FYI.
And your point being?
They can extend both Bobby and Jaron, no problem.
What are you expecting the Jaron deal to be?
Probably like, I want to say like 14. I know that's like pretty high, but I think he would balk at anything like low teens. But I could see like, because he's not like he's not like a pass rusher. You know what I mean? He's a DT. He's not a Frank Clark. He's not going to, and the reality is I don't think he's going to put up like 10 to 13 sacks every single year. He'll probably hit like 7 to 10, 11, that kind of ballpark every single year. I think 13 or 14 sounds right.
So do you want to pay him after his 10-sack season, or do you want to see him do it again without Frank?
I want to see him do it again.
That's
the idea that he's even a 7-sack player, I think, is a reach. I mean, he's probably going to be back down in 4 or 5. I think 7 will probably be the highest. It would not shock me if he doesn't get 7 sacks in a single season the rest of his career.
Yeah, I really like Jaron. I'd just be weary about paying him now at his peak value, coming off like Frank's crazy season, which definitely helped him. I want to see him what he does kind of on his own.
Is next year is the 1 year before he'd be a free agent, right? He has 2 years left on his deal. Is that right?
Yeah, I think he's up after this season.
Oh, yeah, he is after 2019. Wow.
Yeah, him and Bobby and Frank were all going to be due, and Russell. Yeah, they do have that franchise tag at their disposal now because Russell's done.
They do. And that's the other path forward with Bobby is, you let him play this season and you let him walk and get a comp pick for him. you do the Earl Thomas approach.
Don't do anything what they did with Earl Thomas.
Well, yeah, I mean, at least they got something for Earl. I mean,
yeah, well, they got 12 picks next year, right now.
Yeah, I mean, including a third for Earl. So, yeah, I think Jaron Reed to me is more like a $10 to $12 million player, and I'd be comfortable paying him in that range. And I'm not so sure that that's out of realistic realistic scenario for what they could sign him for. So I do hope they sign him and extend him right now. I like that he's showing up to camp. He's being the player that and the leader that we've seen. I think he's proven before. So yeah, I hear Jeff, you and Nathan on not paying him at his top value. The other way about that is if you guys are wrong and he does have a good year this year, you're going to be looking at a lot more than what we're talking about right now. I think there's a case to be made of the negotiation. Like you've had one good year from a pass rush perspective. You had Frank. You have all these things you guys are just talking about. We're going to pay you above what you've earned because we believe in you, and that's $10 or $11 million a year. Like if they have to go and pay him like he is a proven quantity at the defensive line position, then maybe you had your bets. But
I mean, if you're talking about $12 million for him, though, you're already paying him that way. $12 million is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th most for a 4-3 defensive tackle according to Over the Cap. So
yeah, that's right now. I mean, that's going to quickly be I mean, Tyler Lockett was like the 7th, or he and that quickly became like the 20th or 30th highest contract. So like, as long as you're not setting market with him, I think that's okay, and I think that's like tier 1A, 2B, 2A kind of thing.
This really reminds me of the Tyler Lockett situation where they extended him. We hadn't seen a good year from Tyler Lockett due to injuries, like a fully 100% year for a couple of years since his rookie year. And then obviously we know what happened in 2018. My fear is, like Brian just said, if Jaron produces another 10-sack year, that boy's looking at big numbers.
Yeah, but then you got a guy that's produced 10 sacks from the defensive tackle position in back-to-back years. Like, yeah, he's going to make a lot of money, and he'll probably have earned it, right? I mean, so the thing with Lockett, I think, is different too, because, I mean, the Lockett contract was risky, but it was risky because we didn't know if he was going to get back to full health. They obviously had more insight into that, and they were obviously proven right on that. But Lockett had shown it and had not done anything like out of expectations. Like Lockett was a really fast, receiver who made a bunch of plays. Like that was exactly what you thought Lockett was going to be. I don't think you would have found anyone, when Reed got drafted saying, "Oh yeah, this is a Geno Atkins, 10-sack, double-digit sack guy." Like that's not who Reed was thought to be. In fact, I think when they drafted him, they touted him as the best run-stuffing defensive tackle, not a pass rusher. So I think that there's even more so than Lockett, there's more reason to kind of slow play Reed.
Yeah, and looking at these numbers for Over the Cap, Evan mentioned it's like 65 million. It could actually be closer to like 99 million in cap room, because the two highest paid guys below Russell are Cam Chancellor at 12, who's not going to be on the books by 2020, and Doug Baldwin at 11, who it's hard to imagine him being back again in 2020. Then there's also KJ Wright and Ed Dixon. You can knock off almost 10 million between those two. So right there, that's almost 40 more million they could add in cap room just for next year. So that's almost 100 million after paying Russell.
And what's Mingo? Like he's 5, right? That's another easy 5.
Brown is like, you can get 7 million just from those two this year.
Well, yeah, those were 2-year deals. So
yeah, Mingo is free agent after 2019.
Why is he on the roster?
So I guess he was already included.
I think he's Kendrick's insurance right now. I think if Kendrick's gets cleared,
yeah, we'll see. But look, I definitely see this one differently. I think that they need to buy in advance as where possible of of potential increased production. I don't think that they can afford to be paying looking backwards, and they're going to have to make some bets. So one of the things they're going to have to bet on is, draft picks and doing that well and getting some cheaper talent surrounding their quarterback, who's got the highest, the largest contract in the NFL right now. And the other is, I think they're going to have to pick their places where they pay ahead of and anticipate where a player's trajectory is going to go. And Jarran Reed, to me, is a guy that I'd bet on. I would bet on right now. I'd pay him now. I don't think you're paying at his top value. I think he has potential to be a consistent performer, and maybe that's where the three of us maybe see it a little bit differently. I'm talking about Jeff and Nathan and I. I don't think that you can at all count on anybody being like any defensive tackle being other than like Aaron Donald being a consistent double-digit sack guy. Chris Jones might be in that category, but I think Jarran Reed showed that he could be a 7 to 8 sack guy with some consistency, and I think that's hugely valuable in the defensive interior. And for all the other reasons I mentioned, I would buy now on him. My answer might change if it's in the 15 million range. That's kind of crazy money for what he's proven. I don't think he's proven enough to do that. So, all right, we've been on for a while. The only thing we haven't really talked about that I can think of is the Russell deal. Evan, let's start with you just quickly as we're wrapping up on this. What was your take on the Russell deal? How did you feel when Russell found his new money and his new voice?
Yeah.
How did you feel about it, Evan?
Yeah, quick high-level overview. 4 years, $140 million, $65 million signing bonus, $70 million fully guaranteed. So that's $65 million signing bonus plus the 5 year, or not the 5 year, the $5 million in base salary of 2019. He sees $107 million in total guarantees, which is code word for injury guarantees. So if he dies tomorrow, if he tears his ACL tomorrow and he never plays football again, he gets $107 million. So the high level, quick bullet points we should hit is, number one, the Seahawks preserve their structure of not guaranteeing any base salaries beyond year one. Only year one, 2019, that $5 million base salary is fully guaranteed at signing. Every other base salary is not guaranteed, 100% fully guaranteed at signing. And the way Russell and his agent were cool with that was they're getting 50% of the deal's value in year one in cash to Russell Wilson. Think about that. $140 million deal, Russell Wilson, for cash purposes, not for cap purposes, for cash purposes, like money going to Russell Wilson's wallet, he sees $70 million year one. So that's a big, big deal from a cash flow perspective. That $65 million signing bonus is all paid out year one to the player. Well, actually, technically that's not true, but just pretend it's true, because oftentimes those payments are cash deferred into different years, but it's prorated equally over the cap over 5 years. So, great deal for the Seahawks. Very good that it wasn't, his base salaries aren't tied to any growing percentage of the cap. As we know, with gambling potentially being legalized in the next few years, we could see the cap skyrocket. We've seen $10 million gross, $11 million gross year over year. We could see, I don't know, double, triple that if gambling is legalized. We have no idea. Revenue could explode even more so with the amount of cash that gambling would inject into the NFL. So it's a big, big deal, I think, for both sides. Russell Wilson's going to be, 35 by the time this contract is over. If you don't feel comfortable giving him another extension after this, you could probably just tag him another couple times. He'd be 37, 38. I think this might be weird to say, but I could see this being Russell Wilson's last normal extension with the Seahawks, and that's weird to say.
Why? Wait, I don't understand. Why?
Because if he slows down athletically or anything by 35, they don't have to commit to another 5-year deal with him. They could just tag him, for a couple years straight, and then he'd be 37. And, that's up there. Who knows what Russell Wilson looks like at 37. 7 years is a lot of time in the NFL. He could have injuries, whatever. He could slow down. I think this could potentially be the last prototypical extension.
Now he after this deal was shown with 3 chains. How many chains do you think he will have by the next time he signs a contract with the Seahawks?
I hope it's a few more rings, not chains.
That's the right
That's
answer.
the real answer.
Jeff, you know, I saw this deal as more than just the money. I think this was a crossroads moment for the team, and I do believe there was a real potential that this deal was not going to happen, and that they were going to, instead of maybe Frank getting traded, we could be talking about a Russell trade. Like that. That was, as crazy as it sounds, that was a possibility. Now that that's no longer the case, this is Russell's team. They're going to build around him. He's got a contract that I think it outlasts John or Pete in terms of what's going on right now. Highest paid player in the league. I think there's a lot of the players that the detractors in the locker room have left or are leaving, and I think that this could be the dawn of a new, more harmonious, different locker room and different feel about what how this team operates. And I'm curious, like, what were your thoughts about not so much the money, but just about what this means to the Seahawks and the future?
Oh, I think it was completely reinvigorating for me as a fan, and just for the entire fan base. If you remember when we were on the day of the deadline, none of us were over 50% thinking it was going to get done. I think some of us, I was under 10%. So I was pretty down about where the Seahawks were as a team. We were talking about Russell trades that night. It really seemed, just the way things were leaking in the media, that his exit was kind of being, that Kirk Cousins route just seemed like such a bad scenario for both sides, where there was going to be all those leaks and it was going to be a rough 2 years. And to get him done was such a win for the team. And it was, Evan went over why it was a win for the player, but it was just such a win to kind of just get that cornerstone back. And all that talk about whether Russell wanted to stay in Seattle and that no trade clause was proof that that was bullshit. So it was just, the deal was just fucking awesome. I didn't stay up till 12 at night your time. I went to bed, and to wake up and see that was really, to me, that really just re-sparked my just kind of passion for the Seahawks. It really got me pumped up again, because they haven't made a move like that in a while. And really just the fact that they got it done at that deadline, it kind of showed they're still competent. And when you add that Frank Clark trade and what John Schneider's done in the past week, it's been just inspiring, or not inspiring, just reinvigorated my excitement for this team, because I was pretty down on where this team was. It just seemed like they were like meddling towards nothing. And if they didn't sign Russell on top of that, that really would have made me anxious. So getting it done just at the right rate and seeing all like the support from the team and all his teammates, that really just invigorated me as a fan.
Yeah, I think that's really, really well said. And you look at the fact that the team didn't have to break any new ground contractually. This wasn't tied to the percentage of cap. They didn't have to guarantee money that, beyond the years that they normally do. Russell got what he wanted in terms of the top paid player. And that point you made about, there were signs in this that both the Seahawks were going to commit to him by giving him this much money, and that Russell was going to commit to the city and to this team by having a no trade clause, and that he wanted to be here and to not demand some of these. Those were the conversations we were having. Mm-hmm. So, I think those two things together, just by themselves, are a really powerful signal of where the team was. Nathan, I'm gonna give you the last word here. Your feelings about the deal, and then maybe zoom out a little bit to the offseason in general, and what your feeling is about how this offseason has gone so far for Seattle.
I like the deal. I like Russell Wilson. I think he is good, and I'm glad he's here for 4 or 5 more years. I think it's just a simple kind of slam dunk kind of thing. Yeah. In terms of the offseason, I mean, it's got to be like A+ at this point. They took a cautious approach to free agency, which I think was smart. When we did a free agency recap podcast, there wasn't anyone out there that we were like, oh, I wish Seattle had done that deal. They were protective of their comp picks. They locked up a franchise quarterback for several more years. They made a tough decision on Clark, but the right one, and they got a great haul for it. I think more than anyone was really expecting. And so now they've got to go work the draft and stuff, but they're set up really well right now. Of course, I'm biased on all this, but and I have my own opinions, and who knows if I'm right or wrong. I'm wrong a lot, but they did everything that I wanted them to do, pretty much. I can't think of really anything where I had a complaint or I thought it was the wrong, it was bad process or anything like that. So I don't have any complaints. I think that they did a great job. This Clark thing is going to be hard this first year, especially as the rookies kind of learn and grow. And Clark is very good, and he's going to a very good team. So it's going to be really easy to second guess this one right away. But I think it was, like I said, the absolute right thing to do, and I think they've set themselves up really well for the future, and I'm really happy about it.
Well, there you go, folks. A+ offseason so far. On the eve of the draft from Nathan Ernst, who is a difficult grader. So that's meaningful, and I can only imagine that that's a little tough for Evan because it leaves him no room to go higher. Like there's nothing above A+, and that's gonna be something Evan's gonna have to think about for a little bit.
How many wins are the Seahawks going to take home in 2019, Nathan?
I don't know. I think they can win 9 or 10 again. I don't think that's hard to see.
13 is bottom line.
They're gonna have to. They're gonna have to pass more this year. They're gonna have to. Like, I know that. Like, I don't want to get into it already, but like, their defense just got worse. Their defense almost certainly will not be as good as it was last year. Like
13-3, boys. 13-3. We're coming for it.
They're gonna have to make changes to get there.
Yeah.
I think it's a hard schedule too. I didn't pay any attention when like just the teams came out, but when the actual schedule came out, they've got some tough teams. It could be a tough year, but yeah, I think they're a good team.
Let's remember to cover schedule when we after the draft. That'd be a good one to tack on. So help me with that, guys. But yeah, it's been a really positive offseason. A lot of heady decisions overall for the team, and I think there's a lot of reasons to feel positive about the Seahawks being in as good of a situation as they could have been at this point relative to where they ended the season. And other than maybe some crazy scenario where really good players were somehow available to them for really ridiculous prices, they've made wise, pragmatic decisions. So
yeah, I found a complaint. I'm docking them. They're downgraded to an A because they should have traded for Robert Quinn, especially now after you traded Clark. He would have been. That's the one. That's the one deal that they should have done that they didn't do. So, no A+, just an A.
All right. We talked too long, Jeff.
And don't draft a running back tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow
probably at all.
Tomorrow is massive. This could make. I'm not going to give him an A+ yet, but if they crush tomorrow, this could be John Schneider's best offseason since 2010 or 2012. And it's been so far from that. In the last couple of years, we crushed them for 2018 and 2017 and 2016. They needed a year like this coming off that Dallas game. And tomorrow, I can't understate how big this is for this team because there are talent issues. We just mentioned the defense. They need to get better. They need receivers. John, let's go, man.
Yeah, well said. Well said. So, with that, I'm going to try to get this pod up as quickly as possible. I might even do it, after this and get it up right away. So folks can know there's a lot of requests for it to get up quickly so you can listen to it before the draft tomorrow. That makes sense to me. And as always, you can subscribe to the pod. So please, if you haven't already, do that on YouTube. Also, you can subscribe either on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, all those spots. It's Stitcher. It's in all those spots. And if you haven't already, please give us a review. It would be super helpful. Get people aware of the pod, share it, just tell someone about it. All those things are great. And if you haven't already, sign up for Patreon. Patreon, patreon.com/hawkblogger. be happy to have you guys join the crew and get a little more access to all of us. So, man, enjoy the draft tomorrow, everybody. We have reason to believe the Seahawks will actually do at least a few interesting things. Maybe they'll pick. We know they're going to make trades. So keep an eye on it. We'll be back Sunday at 8 p.m. Pacific time to recap it all and start talking about what's going to happen next season. Cheers. Have a great night. Go Hawks.